Welcome back to Steady Badges Stories. I'm glad you're here. Whether you're driving through the snow somewhere in Ontario, sitting in your kitchen in BC with a cup of tea, or staying up way too late in Nova Scotia, I'm happy you found this one. Before we get into today's story, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment down below telling me where you're listening from. I love hearing from all of you. Now settle in, because this one is going to stay with you. The neurologist didn't look up from his clipboard when they wheeled Colonel Alistair Brine into the examination room. He was 71 years old. He had spent 34 years in the Royal Canadian Navy. He had commanded a destroyer through the North Atlantic in winter swells that would make most men's knees give out even when those knees still worked. He had 3 medals in a shoebox under his bed that he never showed anyone, and for the last 17 years he had not taken a single step under his own power. Dr. Vance Kellaway finally looked up. Colonel Brine. He said the name the way someone might read a file number. I've reviewed your case. The imaging, the previous assessments, the surgical notes from Ottawa. He set the clipboard on the counter. I want to be honest with you. You've been seen by some of the finest neurological specialists in the country. The consensus hasn't changed. His daughter, Petra, was standing just behind the wheelchair. She had driven 5 hours from Sudbury for this appointment. She had taken 2 days off work she couldn't afford to take. Her hands were clasped in front of her so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. The spinal involvement at T6 and T7 is chronic and progressive. Dr. Kellaway continued. There is no surgical pathway that presents an acceptable risk-to-benefit ratio at your father's age. I would be doing him a disservice to suggest otherwise. He was walking, Petra said. Her voice was quiet, but her jaw was set. Before the incident in 2008, he was completely mobile. Brine. He was running. He ran 5 kilometers every morning. Dr. Kellaway picked up his clipboard again. It was a small gesture. It was also the most dismissive thing another person could do in that moment, and they all knew it. I understand this is difficult, he said. The palliative care team here is excellent. I'll have my assistant refer you to. I don't need palliative care, Alistair said. It was the first time he'd spoken. His voice hadn't gone anywhere. It was still the voice of a man who had given orders in 20-foot seas. Dr. Kellaway looked at him for a moment, then looked back at his clipboard. I'll have my assistant arrange the referral. He walked to the door and held it open. There was a beat, a terrible, suspended beat, where Petra looked at her father, and Alistair looked at nothing in particular. And then Petra took a breath and reached for the handles of the wheelchair. The nurse who had been standing near the supply cabinet in the corner of the room had not moved. She was wearing scrubs the color of a clear October sky, that particular bright blue that doesn't quite fit the gray palette of a hospital corridor. She was somewhere in her mid-30s, maybe early 40s, with brown hair pulled back in a low knot that had come a little loose over the course of the shift. She had been quiet the entire appointment. She had taken his vitals when they arrived and written something in the chart, and then stood to the side the way nurses do when the doctor is in the room, present but peripheral. Her name tag said, V. Morrow, RN. She hadn't moved toward the door yet. Dr. Kellaway noticed. Dessa, can you show the family out and arrange for Colonel Brine, she said. She wasn't looking at Dr. Kellaway. She was looking at Alistair. I'd like to ask you something if that's all right. Alistair turned his head toward her. When you were deployed, she said, were you ever treated for pain management in the field? Anything done outside of a regular medical facility? Forward operating base, ship's medical bay, anything like that? The room changed temperature. Petra looked at the nurse. Dr. Kellaway looked at the nurse. Alistair looked at the nurse the way he might look at a subordinate who had just said something that was either very stupid or very correct, and he hadn't yet determined which. Vanessa. Dr. Kellaway's voice had taken on a different quality, patient, careful. The tone of a person managing an inconvenience. We don't need to. I'm asking the colonel, she said. She said it without raising her voice, without looking away from Alistair, without any particular heat in the words at all, which somehow made it worse. For Dr. Kellaway, anyway. Alistair studied her for a long moment. What's your background, he asked. I'm a nurse, she said. Before that, she didn't answer right away. Then, I worked in austere environments for a while. Forward medical teams, search and rescue. A pause. You learned to ask different questions. Alistair was quiet, then he said 1997. Gulf of Oman, we had a situation and the ship's surgeon was unavailable. A corpsman handled it. Field epidural block improvised, not standard procedure. Petra said, Dad, you never. It's not in the official record, Alistair said. He was still looking at the nurse. Never made it into my file. The corpsman was PO2, Petty Officer 2nd Class McAllister. He's been dead 12 years. Vanessa Morrow was nodding slowly. Something had shifted in her face. Not excitement, not triumph. Something quieter and more purposeful than either of those things. Has anyone ever done an ultrasound-guided assessment of your thoracic epidural space? She asked. Specifically looking for calcified deposits around the injection site? The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. Dr. Kellaway set his clipboard down. The imaging would have caught. he started. Standard MRI protocols don't flag it as pathological if the radiologist isn't specifically looking for iatrogenic calcification at atypical sites, she said. Especially if the procedure isn't in the file, there's no flag. Nobody's looking for it because nobody knows to look. She was still talking to Alistair, not to Dr. Kellaway. It would have been a slow process. Something that developed over years. The deposits wouldn't have caused complete loss of function immediately. The progression would have looked like a lot of other things. Alistair said nothing. His hands resting on the arms of his wheelchair had gone very still. "Would you allow me to request that imaging?" she asked. "I know you've had a lot of imaging. I know you've been through a lot of assessments. I'm not promising anything. I just want to know if I'm right." Petra's voice came out strange and cracked when she said, "How long would it take to get results?" "I'll put it through as urgent," Vanessa said, "if Dr. Kellaway approves the order." Everyone in the room turned to Dr. Kellaway. He was a man who prided himself on his diagnostic record. He was a man who had trained at McGill and done his residency at Toronto General, and built a career on being the person in the room who was most likely to be correct. He was also, at this particular moment, the person in the room who least wanted to approve a nursing recommendation that would either prove him wrong or generate no result at all, and in either case would make him look like the obstacle rather than the physician. He approved the order. He left the room while he was doing it, which told you everything you needed to know. The imaging was done that afternoon. Petra sat with her father in the waiting room. They didn't talk much. Alistair had a way of handling uncertainty that he had developed over 3 decades. He sat with it the way you sit with bad weather, without fighting it. Petra had not inherited this skill. She checked her phone 7 times in 20 minutes and then put it in her bag. The cafeteria on the second floor sold good coffee, and Vanessa Morrow, who was technically off her break, appeared with 2 cups and handed one to Petra without asking if she wanted it. "Have you been a nurse long?" Petra asked. "Long enough," Vanessa said. She glanced at Alistair, who had his eyes closed. "He was in the Navy 34 years? 34 and a half. He says the half matters." Petra looked down at her coffee cup. "He retired the year I graduated university. He was at my graduation. That was the last time he walked anywhere. 4 months later he was in hospital." Vanessa was quiet. "He never complained," Petra said. "Not once. That was the worst part. The physios would come and he would do whatever they said and he never said a word about it. He's not a man who talks about what things cost him." "No," Vanessa said. "Usually they're not." Something in how she said it made Petra look at her differently. "You worked with military personnel," Petra said. It wasn't quite a question. "For a while. Where?" A pause. "Kandahar, mostly. Some time in Djibouti. A rotation in Petawawa before I left the forces." She said it without ceremony, like reciting a postal route. "I got out about 6 years ago, retrained as an RN." Petra looked at her for a long moment. "Why did you stay in the corner during the whole appointment?" Vanessa smiled, and it was a tired smile but a real one. "Because that's where nurses stand. But you knew, didn't you? You knew when you were reading his file." "I had a suspicion," Vanessa said. "Suspicions aren't diagnoses." Alistair opened his eyes. "He had been Lister," he said. Poe 2 McAllister. He was 23 years old when he did that procedure. 23 years old with a manual and a field kit and whatever the God-given instincts he was born with. He saved my life that night." He paused. "And he probably also gave me 17 years in this chair." "He kept you alive," Vanessa said. "And what he did, in the circumstances he was working in, with what he had, was remarkable. What he couldn't have known was the long-term presentation. Neither could anyone else if it wasn't in the record." Alistair looked at her for a long time. "What's your call sign?" he asked. She looked at him. "Everybody who's been out there has a call sign," he said. "A beat." "Anchor," she said. He nodded once, like that settled something. The results came back at 4:47 in the afternoon. Vanessa was on the floor with 2 other patients when the radiologist called Dr. Kellaway's extension, and she heard about it third hand, through a unit clerk who found her in room 14 and said Dr. Kellaway wanted her in his office. She took the long way around. She stopped and washed her hands even though her hands didn't need washing. She was doing what she always did when something mattered, making herself move at a normal pace so that the feeling underneath couldn't get ahead of her. Dr. Kellaway's office had a glass wall facing the corridor, which she had always thought was an odd choice for a man who clearly valued the ability to make people feel small. He was standing behind his desk when she came in. He did not invite her to sit. "The imaging confirmed calcification," he said. "Bilateral deposits at T6, T7 consistent with the presentation you described." "Yes," she said, "it's operable, in theory. The surgical approach is non-standard, but there are 2 centers in the country that have done comparable procedures. Ottawa Civic, Vancouver General." He paused. "I've already made a call to Ottawa." She didn't say anything. "It's a good catch," he said. He said it the bullpay things they are choosing to say, rather than things they want to say. "Good clinical instinct. It's in the literature," she said. "There was a case study published in 2019. Military personnel with undocumented field procedures. It was a small sample, but the pattern was there. I'm not familiar with it. No, she said. Another silence. I'll need to speak to the family, he said. I'll present the surgical options. She nodded and turned to leave. Vanessa. She stopped. How did you know to ask about the field procedure? She turned back. She thought about how to answer this. She thought about Kandahar and the men she had worked beside in conditions that bore no resemblance to the clean white corridors of this hospital. She thought about PO2 McAllister, 23 years old, saving a life with what he had, in the dark, a long way from home. Because I know what gets left out of files, she said. And I know the kind of men who don't tell anyone how much something hurt them. She left. The surgery was scheduled for 3 weeks later in Ottawa. Petra drove her father there herself. It was November, and the highway between Sudbury and Ottawa was the kind of November highway that reminds you that the country is very large and very cold, and mostly indifferent to your plans. They listened to CBCC radio for a while, and then to nothing at all, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind that you can only have with someone you've known long enough to stop performing. She didn't have to do that, Alistair said somewhere past Matawa. Petra knew who he was talking about. No, she said. In the room. When he tried to end it, I know, she's good at her job, he said. Yes. He was quiet for a kilometer or two. She reminded me of people I served with, he said. Not the flashy ones, the ones who were just there, every time, no matter what the situation was. You never had to wonder what they were going to do. You just knew they were going to do the right thing. Petra kept her eyes on the highway. Her throat was doing something she didn't want to acknowledge while she was driving. I'm going to walk at Christmas, Alistair said. It wasn't a prediction. It wasn't a hope. It was stated with the same flat certainty he had once used to give weather orders on the bridge of a destroyer. I'm going to walk into your house for Christmas dinner. Petra said, I know, Dad. She meant it. The surgery took 6 hours. The neurosurgeon in Ottawa, Dr. O.C. Kwam, a compact, unhurried man who had done his fellowship in London and spoke with a precision that reminded Petra of a very good watchmaker, came out to the family room afterward and said the procedure had gone as well as it could have gone. The deposits had been more extensive than the imaging suggested, which was common. The spinal cord had been compressed but not severed. Not damaged beyond recovery. Not damaged beyond recovery. Petra sat with those words for a while before they made sense. Rehabilitation was not a montage. It was 3 weeks at a facility in Ottawa that smelled of institutional cleaning products and optimism. And then another 6 weeks at home in Sudbury with a physiotherapist named Gord, who arrived every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 in the morning and put Alistair through his paces with the relentless cheerfulness of a man who genuinely loved his work. Alistair did not love Gord's cheerfulness. He did, however, do everything Gord asked him to do. The first time he took 3 steps with a walker, Petra was in the kitchen making coffee, and she heard a sound she didn't recognize at first. A kind of careful, deliberate shuffling, and she came to the doorway, and her father was standing up, holding the walker, and his face was the face of a man who was working very hard at not letting his face do anything it shouldn't. She went back into the kitchen. She stood at the counter for a moment. Then she cried into a dish towel for about 30 seconds, which was 30 seconds longer than she had planned. When she came back out, Alistair had sat back down. Good coffee, he asked. I forgot to make it, she said. He said. The Christmas dinner was on the 23rd of December, because Petra's husband, Rob, was on shift the 24th and 25th. He drove for a regional ambulance service, and the family had been doing Christmas on whatever day worked for years now, which Alistair had long ago decided was the sensible approach anyway. He stood in the driveway. Petra's car had pulled up and he had come out the front door. His front door, the house in Sudbury where he had lived since 1998, and he walked down the 3 front steps using the railing, which he was allowed to do. Gord had said the railing was fine, and then he stood in the driveway in his good coat with the snow coming down in the slow, indifferent way it does in northern Ontario in December, and Petra got out of the car and just stopped. She had Rob with her, and her 2 kids, Bram, who was 9, and Lucy, who was 6 and who had never in her life seen her grandfather standing. Lucy walked up to him slowly. She was wearing a red coat and rubber boots with penguins on them, and she looked up at him the way 6-year-olds look at things that don't make immediate sense. Papa, she said, you're tall. Alistair looked down at her. Something happened to his face that Petra had not seen since her mother's funeral. Not grief, but the other side of grief. The place where you end up after you've been carrying something heavy for long enough and you finally set it down. He crouched. It was an effort, and it was a real crouching. A man on 2 legs going down to meet a small person in penguin boots. I used to be taller, he said. Lucy considered this. Then she put her arms around his neck, and Alistair held on. 3 weeks into the new year, a card arrived at the neurology department at the hospital. It was addressed to the nursing staff, Unit 7 North. Inside, in handwriting that was slightly unsteady but perfectly legible, it said, to the nurse who asked the question nobody else thought to ask. I was a naval officer for 34 years. I know what it means to be the person who does what needs to be done without waiting to be told. You did your job the way it should be done. I am grateful. Colonel A. Brine, Vanessa read it in the break room on a Tuesday afternoon. She folded it once and put it in the pocket of her bright blue scrubs. The unit clerk, Hamid, who had seen her read it, asked if it was good news. Yeah, she said. She poured herself a coffee. Good news. She went back to the floor. She had 4 patients waiting and a new admission coming up from emergency. And the afternoon had that particular quality that hospital afternoons get in January. Compressed and relentless and full of the small urgencies of other people's lives. She pulled the chart on room 14 and went to work. That was what she did. That was what she had always done. Whether it was a forward medical tent outside Kandahar, or a search and rescue call-out in the Gatineau Hills, or a neurology ward in northern Ontario where a man in a wheelchair sat in the corner of an examination room, and a doctor with a clipboard was already heading for the door. She showed up. She asked the question. She stayed in the room. That was all. And sometimes, not always, not even often, but sometimes, it was exactly enough. Thanks for listening, everyone. If this story meant something to you, please hit the like button. It really does help more people find the channel. Leave a comment down below and tell me where you listened from today. I always read them. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.